All right, this is Tim Kaine, communication between roles.
Hi, everyone. It's me,
Hi,
Tim.
Tim.
Today, I want to talk about communication between
Yeah,
roles, specifically, how to handle all the different roles of people on your development team and getting them to talk to each
ignore
other.
them.
This is actually a question from Boku, who asks, I wonder about the different communication channels between roles. Which roles are often together and such because they are closely related in development? You hinted at level
Good question.
designers and narratives being together, for example. Boku.
I think that is a fantastic question. I think that it often depends on what you're working on. Oh man, but I mean this just goes to kind of like core. God, there's a lot of factors. Okay, so there's a few factors to this. I think that there's a factor of team size to this where the smaller your team, the more intercommunication might be occurring between everybody. Whereas the larger your team, the more structured it is. So you have heads talking to leads, talking to teams, and producers jumping in and out all over the place. Similar to with maybe like QA and design to some extent. There are some times though where you will have not much communication or maybe not even much need for communication between certain teams depending on what you're working on. If I could say anything, I think that the most important thing to achieve communication between roles is to not put barriers between teams. You may not need to talk to them now, but the worst thing that can exist when you do need to talk to somebody is that there's some bullshit. Oh, well, make sure you talk to this person first and then, file a form that says, okay, I need to talk to you. When do you have open? And then you need to reply to that by 3 p.m. on Thursdays, or else we're not going to have a meeting. And then meetings can only be maximum 30 minutes in length, and you have to have a set agenda before you go into it. I mean, some of these things are good practice, right? But barriers also just make people not want to talk, right? And I think that now with so much remote work going on, there are additional barriers that people didn't anticipate that make it more important than ever to remove barriers and to set up some, maybe not standards, maybe standards is not the right word, but practices that enable good communication. Adds more barriers, right? I mean, I've worked in places like that where they just had such a strict hierarchy that you could get in trouble with, talking to somebody who, I don't know. I never did it though. I was always the designer, like, bro, I don't care, just talk to me. Like, you have a problem with you have a question with design, you have a problem, just talk to me directly. You don't need to go through some official thing. Just send me a message. We'll talk about it. You want to go talk about it over lunch? Let's go talk about it over lunch.
This is a really good question. It's also a really serious question
It is.
because it has to do with how you're going to manage.
It's so serious because number one, miscommunications can fuck up people emotionally. Miscommunications can cause massive issues with work getting done in the wrong way. And all of this adds to like stress and time, and that's money, and then stress causes worse performance, which takes more time, which costs more money, and that fucks with people. Then people are arguing, and then there's issues. Communication is the name of the game. I mean, that's what I say. Like, design is communication, but also working in a team is communication. And if you ruin that, if you fuck that up in some way, it can have dramatically what's the word? It trickles down, right? It just trickles down and it trickles outwards until it can become this massive issue over somebody just not typing a sentence very well, and then the other person not saying, what do you mean by that? I mean, how many of us have worked in a company where it's like this big argument could have been resolved if somebody had just asked, wait, what do you mean? Or could you please clarify, because I think I'm misunderstanding.
A team, especially as teams get bigger. This gets more and more important.
Yes.
And get them to work together, even though there are several of them, many of different types of people. Some people want to have these discussions, some people will dominate the discussions, other people don't want to have
It's true.
discussions at all. But you need to get people to communicate. And At a high level, I would just answer and say this cross role communication is most often between programmers and designers who are assigned to the same task.
Yeah,
Like you see it like
like a strike team.
combat needs to be put in your
Mm-hmm.
game, whether it's melee combat or ranged combat or both, or you're putting together dialogue. And a designer has designed those systems and a programmer is going to code them, and you have to make sure those two people talk.
And programmers are up in my shit all the time, and I love it. Sometimes a little bit too much, though.
This is not even to mention that the artists have to be involved for making the animations for combat or the UX for dialogue. This stuff, all these people have to be involved, but they frequently don't want to talk to each other. And also, people on different roles often have different styles
Yes, they do.
of talking to each other.
Again, why that's one of the reasons why game design is so difficult, is because you have to adapt to everybody's communication style, and it's hard. It's really hard. You can't be socially awkward. You can't. You might have problems if you're social. I'll put it that way. You might have problems if you're socially awkward. You're probably gonna have trouble working as a designer, because you just need to be adaptable. You need to be able to speak to people with pretty high levels of autism. You need to speak to people who are domineering in terms of how they handle discussions. You may need to speak to people who are maybe a bit egotistical, right, or a bit inept when it comes to figuring out social cues, and it's really fucking difficult at times.
Um, I'll make high level generalizations later, but let's just say that in general, those roles seem to attract different kinds of people who have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to talking and communication, and you kind of have to accommodate it. One reason we used to do strike teams, we've been doing strike teams for decades.
I said
a strike team is when you take a small team assembled for a very specific purpose. They meet regularly to look at and discuss progress in one very specific feature area. So you may have a combat strike team, you may have a dialogue strike team.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, fish. We're working on the fishing mini game in Golden Chronicles right now, and exactly, you have a strike team. You just get like a designer, programmer, UI artist, probably, because there is quite a bit of UI to it, and a 3D artist together. That's it. That's your strike team. And guess what? For the next 2 weeks, this is the only thing that they're going to have to think about. That's it. And, other people can handle something else. But usually, depending on how you do your production, you're probably only working on 1 or 2 features at a time. So you just get this together so that they can focus, they can hammer it out. They get together, they're in constant communication, right? You make like a separate channel on whatever you're using to discuss. You have daily meetings with producer, and you just hammer it out, and it's very, very effective. It's very efficient, and I think that it's a really good way to also get different people from different parts of the team working together. One thing I also do is strike teams with open feature ownership. So if, let's say, Susie over in 3D Art wanted to be a feature owner of fishing because maybe she loves fishing, she loves fish, she may not be a designer. She may not know how to make that, but she is so engaged in this from a mental standpoint because she loves it, that I can support her as a designer and say, okay, what do you envision for this? And I can say, okay, well, here's, how I think it could work in our game and how it could work with our loop. And she can say her ideas, and we can just kind of iterate on this and let her take ownership of what this is supposed to look like, so that now this part of the game that she would normally in some situations never have an impact on the design of, because she's a 3D artist, right? Which I think is bullshit, but let's just use that as an example. Now she can feel I was the owner of this feature. I was the one that was, had most of the say in the design and how this could come to vision. I want to see Susie's vision of fishing. I think open feature ownership is tough to do, but I think that it's one of the most important things to do if you want to have a lot of long-term retainment of employees at a studio, because it will allow them to feel like they own some part of the game, because they do, right? that it wasn't just the designers designed this game and I did the 3D art. No, it's like, no, I had a say in something that I loved, the fishing. And, meanwhile, my friend, Brian over in programming loves combat, and he was the feature owner, or at least, maybe co-feature owner of the combat system. And it's like everybody just feels like they inserted a bit of themselves into the game just beyond their initial professions. It's tough to do. I think it's really worth doing, but at the very least, strike teams are, I think, something that every company should be looking into.
Stealth strike team. You may have a strike team for a particular level in the game.
Mm-hmm.
A dungeon may get a strike team. This is basically the designer who did that area, plus whatever programmers are involved in getting it done, whatever artists are involved in getting it done. There will usually be a dedicated producer, often an assistant producer, assigned to that strike team. People from sound and QA may sit in as well, especially if it's nearing completion and they know what sounds they're going to need. Or we want QA to know this level is about to go out, or this feature is about to be added to the game. Please come to the strike team, listen to what we're doing, formulate a test plan.
Yeah, that way the QA can kind of understand where it's at and how it's progressing. Yeah, I mean, bringing in QA, I think, to more of the. Sometimes people see QA as being this like almost side bit of game development, and I think that I've had better experience, way more better experience, including QA directly into the development. So, for instance, you often might have a programmer who is like half programmer, half QA, and his or her goal is to just rigorously review code and to find these small bugs that may elude the QA team, or even just be that stopgap between them and the QA team. There's been a lot of good experience with that too.
And know that when, we'll let you know when it goes live, be ready to test it. So these are small teams. And when I say small, they can be 4 people, they might be 8 people. Once they get past 10 or 12 people.
I was just going to say, I think 8 is the recommended maximum size for most teams to have maximum efficiency. But yeah, over 10 it's a bit much.
Oh, it's getting too big.
Yeah.
You basically want people who can sit around a conference table and comfortably talk with each
That's
other.
a good way to say it.
This is something
and it needs to be open.
Like I said, we've been doing for decades. It works really well. However, there were some aspects of my games that needed more tight integration, more tight loops on designing, coding, artifying, testing that, going back and making changes, and testing it again and going back and making changes. One thing where I noticed this right off the bat was in UX. My ultimate solution to this, and I'll get to how I got there, was to put an artist, a designer, and a programmer who are dedicated UX in the same office, in the same room. Often, it's just their room. So it's a 3-person room.
I like that.
It's those 3 people sitting in there, and that's what they're doing. What happened was we didn't do this on my games at Cybron and at Interplay. We didn't do this on Fallout. So a lot of the interfaces were put together by different people, and maybe you can tell. Art-wise, they fit together. Function-wise, maybe not so much. But I noticed at Troika, when we were working on Temple of Elemental Evil, that a programmer, a producer, and an artist were all seated near each other, right in a row, boom, boom, boom. And when we were putting together the combat HUD, they did an amazing job. To this day, I still think Temple of Elemental Evil has not only one of the best reproductions of D&D combat mechanics, especially 3.5 mechanics of any game that's ever shipped, but the HUD was a big part of that. It had that bar, and as you moved, it would drop. And if it dropped too low, you've eaten into your action space, and now you don't get to take an action. You just did 2 movements. It was a really good HUD. I watched that happen, and then later when I was at Carbine, I'm like, I'm going to do that on purpose. So I took...
This is one of those things, by the way, that remote work that... This always gets me in a hornet's nest on this channel. This is one of the pitfalls of remote work. is you don't have creatives in the same space. And sometimes creatives sitting next to each other, being near a whiteboard that they can all see very clearly, and being able to use physical movements and forcefully take time away from looking at a screen to do something in that moment is way more efficient than working remotely could ever be in the same amount of time. That's my hot take. I'm not saying remote work it's impossible to do this, but I'll tell you what, it is a hell of a lot more difficult and it doesn't happen as spontaneously. Nowhere near as spontaneously as when people come into an office, they take the time to sit down, look at the whiteboard, or go to lunch and talk about a problem. It just doesn't happen. So if you're going to do remote work, you have to try to encourage those moments like that, or to you just need to understand that it's a different way of working. It's a very different beast of working. It isn't just people working, but at home, it is now you have purposefully cut off some people's, especially visual, people who are more visual friendly, more creative in groups. You're cutting off their lifeline to being creative. And if you can't find a viable solution to that, they're not going to work nearly as efficiently as if they were in an office with other people, pen in hand.
A UI programmer, a UI artist, and a UI designer, and I put them together in one room and said, "You are the UX team." They complained at first, especially the programmer. Programmers like quiet spaces. I want to talk in a bit about generalizations. They complained for about 2 weeks. Then they realized A, they really liked it, and B, it was super productive. Because we would meet every week, and the first week they're we don't like it. The second week we're like, we don't like it, but look what we did. But
think of it this way, efficiency and productivity are not linear graphs. And I think that there's a mistake with a lot of people that think that productivity is linear. That if they are sitting at or even quality too. I mean, quality is not linear either. So if you're sitting at a computer screen doing 8 hours of work, your 8 hours of work might be shit. You might be distracted a little bit, not as much as when you were in the office, but you're more, you're not completing it to the same level because you're missing certain aspects that would have made you more productive in the moment, right? Going out to lunch for an hour can be seen as unproductive by a lot of managers, right? Because you're not getting work done. But usually people are talking about work things while at lunch for work. I would do this with design problems. And then I would go to lunch with 3D artist, lead artist, and lead programmer. And guess what? It was extremely productive. I would come back with a lot of solutions, and they would have a bit of an understanding of what I was going to do next in the game and what my feelings are. And they could think about that. And this was time that we were forced away in a more casual setting to talk, not as in some sort of hierarchy, but as just coworkers, as teammates. And though that's time that you rip out of people. When somebody's sitting at home and doing their work remotely, they're taking their lunch, but they're not usually taking it with other people. So now that time that they used to spend doing that is cut. Now the designers who could turn around and maybe talk to a programmer or to an artist just casually while they were taking a break, for 10, 15 minutes, getting a drink or having a snack, or just getting standing up and stretching around, that doesn't happen. All that organic that you look at and you say, oh, this is wasted time. No, that was taking a break to then be more productive and focused afterwards. That your productivity after that your focus, that you knew how to solve the problem, you weren't just banging your head against a wall for hours on end with nobody to talk to in a vacuum, which is especially, I think, dangerous for designers. So, I don't know, there's a whole nother video that Tim has in remote work. I don't know what his feelings are on it, but my feelings are on remote work are that it's really not as good as people think. And yeah, I understand that programmers might want their quiet time, but it's not like that can't be achieved in the right setting with the right people. It just sometimes quiet time is good and other times not quiet time is also good. That sometimes talking and being open and having that organic meeting in between, passing or on breaks is actually more productive in the long run than had you been staring at the screen for another 30 to 60 minutes.
By the third week, I was like, you guys are getting a lot of stuff done and it's really good. And they're like, yeah, we are. And I'm like, it might be because you're all sitting next to each other and the designer looks over the programmer's shoulder and goes, by the way, that isn't what the design document says. That's supposed to be over here.
Yes,
Or an artist may lean over and go, I know you had it here, but if you grouped them over here, it would work a lot better. And it did. They produced a really good UX. I repeated that process on Outer Worlds and it worked great. I don't think the programmer ended up in the same office, but the designer and the artist sat together. It was a great team. They worked great. I was always in there just going, this is amazing. I love this. And they
it's a
worked
good
under
feeling.
my constraint of every user interface they made had to be done grayscale so I could see it. And only then could they add color. That worked great. They ended up
I like
liking
that
that
idea.
process because they knew once I approved something, they could do whatever they wanted to it color wise as long as it was a hue and not a value. And I would still approve it because often I couldn't even see the changes they made. Worked great. Now, this kind of intercommunication doesn't always work because, warning, incoming generalizations. This is based on 40, now I'm in my 44th year, 44
He's
years
going to
of
be
working
right,
with
though.
people in the industry, and certain roles tend to attract certain types.
Yes,
So here are my
they do.
generalizations. Programmers want, I would say even need, and I'm a programmer, a very quiet space to work. They need to focus and concentrate. And if there's a lot of chatter, music, fax machines, they will go insane. Getting some programmers to talk to each other is like, pulling teeth. They don't want to talk to each other. What I found though is once they realize how good it is to talk to their fellow programmers and occasionally do pair programming or pair debugging, they like it. But they still need that quiet space to work. That is the most often why you put programmers in the same offices together, usually with a door, not an open plan office, and give them quiet hours. Like, hey, from
Yeah,
10 to noon, don't go bug these programmers. Artists are almost the exact opposite. And remember, this is a generalization, but in general, I find that artists are in their office and they're drawing stuff and animating and doing other stuff, and they're chatting with each other the whole time. Sometimes they have music playing. Sometimes they have movies playing. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone in to watch a 3D artist working on something, and over here is like a movie playing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, and you know what? It's like how if somebody's getting the job done, I'm not really gonna bitch at them for what they're doing on their second monitor or something. Sometimes you can do stuff on your second monitor, sometimes you can't. It just depends on what you're working on. Um, I do feel that way whenever I've walked into an area with programmers. It almost feels like I've walked into the lion's den where they know that I'm there for a conversation and they look at me and they're just like, what's up? And then with artists, it's just like, I can just go in there, start drawing on the board, and then without even saying anything, one of them will get up and fix my shitty drawing. It's good. I enjoy it. The different ways of communicating are funny though. You really,
And
as a designer, I kind of just don't think about it but I just have to like switch different parts of my brain on whenever I'm talking to um, artists and programmers. And I knew that they despised me. That's exactly it. Don't draw like shit easy. I try.
they just seem to be able to do that. But more than any other group I've ever worked with, artists like dark offices, like pitch black offices. They won't even turn on their lights. They like an office like this. To the point where if you give them a windowed office, they will cover over the windows. This has happened multiple times where the blinds were not enough. They would put cardboard or foil in the windows.
I do the same thing.
On two different occasions, at two different companies, at two different offices, there was a complaint filed by the the people who owned the office building saying, "Hey, you can't put cardboard or foil in the windows." And we had to have them take
It's
it
like a
down.
fire hazard
What
or
we ended
something.
up doing was buying blackout curtains on
Yep,
the
yep, yep.
inside. So from the outside, they still saw blinds, and then inside of that were blackout curtains because the artist liked, as some other people on the team put it, they liked being mushrooms. They wanted to be in a dark, dark office. And it's usually they said it's because
Funny.
they wanted to be able to see their screens better and they wanted
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
color differentiation and all
That's
that.
understandable.
Designers are a mixed bag. It's harder to generalize with them. Some of them need absolute quiet, like programmers. Others want interaction. For many of them, it depends on what tasks they're doing. Some tasks they want interaction. Some tasks they're like, this is really complex. I need quiet.
Yeah, it's like that for me. If I'm doing balancing, I really don't want to be interrupted, or writing a document. Sometimes I just need to be in the zone for that. We talked about that before on stream, where it's, some of the things that I would not be against streaming, I don't think I can stream because I need to focus on it. And sadly, streaming rips apart some of my focus on certain things. And, for some things, it's okay if I'm making like this fishing system, and it doesn't matter. But for like writing dialogue, it appears like I'm way, way, way less efficient streaming dialogue writing than if I were just writing it on my own. So, you have to make the call. But I will say that I generally I like discussion if I need discussion, and oftentimes I'll need it if I'm verifying. Rather than wasting the time of different leads for an hour, I could just try to catch the lead programmer on his break and, walk with him to like the store to buy a drink and just say, hey, I was having this problem, can we do this, do you think? Oh yeah, we can do that, that shouldn't be a problem. It's like, okay, I'll keep writing my document then, and we can consider that a non-issue. The fuck with charts or values that can't be interrupted? Yeah, understandable.
So it's kind of hard to figure out offices.
But
for them.
designers have to adapt. Programmers don't usually, they won't usually as much have to adapt to other teams just because they won't have communication at the same level as a designer will with other teams. Designers need to be adaptable.
Mixing people in the same office is usually hard. So it tends to be programmer offices, designer offices, art offices, and then where they get together is in the strike teams.
Yeah.
With the exception, I found UI is so tightly coupled and needs that constant back and forth that for UI, I made an exception, and that was worth it. For everyone else,
Yeah, I've seen that too. Just like UI jumps around between things, or like sound design to some extent. Yeah, I've seen that.
strike team. And let me end up this video by saying something that I've said before, which is I understand that there are people out there who do not like interaction, that interaction is actually a little painful for them.
If you're in game dev, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to interact. Unless you want to be fully indie, I'm sorry. I know people say, "Oh, why don't people just hire modders?" Well, it's like modders are in most cases lone wolves, and sometimes lone wolves can run in the pack. Other times they need to remain lone wolves to be efficient and feeling happy. It's just not everybody works well in a team. Not everybody works well in a team that's 100 people. Not everybody works well in a team that's 10 people. I don't work well in big teams. I work well in small teams. That's where I feel most comfortable. That's where I do my best work. Everybody's got different points here, and I'm sorry, but if you're in game dev, more likely than not, you're gonna have to learn how to work in a team. People on their breaks like to work also. Yep, me, I do that all the time. If you would fuck me my break, and this would be a personal project I would drop.
Whether they're on the spectrum or not, they're just very introverted. And I've always said this to them: I will make accommodations for you. I will make sure maybe you don't have to be in strike teams, or if you are, you don't have to run them, you don't have to talk, but you have to be there to hear these things. And when we have our team meetings, you should be there. You don't have to talk. You can sit in the back. You don't have to interact, but I want you to be there to hear what's going on. So I basically told them, I will make accommodations for you, but you have to make accommodations for me. And if you're unwilling to do that, maybe solo dev is in your future.
Yep.
Because it's never okay for either side to make just ultimatums. I will never do this. I will always do this. So they just have to have an accommodation. But overall, getting different roles on your project to communicate, it always has good results. It is frequently difficult to do it. So the best way I found to do it that works in general are strike teams. And
Agree.
specifically for some very tightly coupled tasks like UX, put them in the same room. They will learn to love it.
That's why I like working in physical teams in person. I definitely prefer it. Like small teams, like to see my influence on others' work and their influence on mine. Me too. Yeah, I like individual people actually having a say over the final product and not just being another cog in some larger machine. Like it's cool, I love big games that get made. I love it. There's some of my favorite games, but at the same time, I can like them without having, wanting to make them myself. A lot of food I love eating, but I wouldn't want to make it myself. You don't need to see somebody urgently. A functioning office should have a physical mailbox for discreet contact. I don't know. I've worked with a couple people who, for instance, liked to work at night. I understood this. They're good friends of mine still. However, I think it is not really great for a game development team where having core hours and being able to communicate in the moment with somebody to prevent wasting time is very important. It depends on the size of the team and maybe what you're working on, but for the most part, you need to have core hours where somebody is in contact and isn't going to be a blocker for somebody else for like 6 hours just because they're not awake yet. It's a little bit ridiculous. But another good video from Tim Cain, Communication Between Roles. I like that one. That was a good one. Guys, go give him a thumbs up and a sub for that one. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that one. And I think I will have one or two more for today if my voice doesn't give out. So thank you for watching that.